Now we're up to Daf Vav Hamid Beis, and we're quoting a brisa of Rabbi Nosson. What does Rabbi Nosson say? Minayin shelo yoshid adam koshel yayin linozav evrim nachay bnei noach tablov na'ivir l'sitei nichshol v'hacha dechilo yavin le shakli ihu v'ka'avar mishum l'fnei ivir l'sitei nichshol. What's going on over here? You extended a cup of wine to a nazir. The nazir has plenty of wine to drink. He doesn't need your wine. You gave him Avram and Achai, which is one of the Sheva Mitzvahs. He has plenty of Avram and Achai. He didn't need your Avram and Achai. And yet Rabbi Nosson says that it still comes under the violation of Lifnei Iver Ositei Mechshol. Meaning that what is Lifnei Iver? I make it somehow a little bit easier for him. Now he has an extra quantity of yayin. He has an extra quantity of Avram and Achai that's accessible to him. And I would add here a couple of footnotes if you have a minute, because I think we're doing okay on the clock, I hope. And that is that the Gemara derives from Lifnei Iver elsewhere that you're not allowed to give a person a bad eitzah. Deliberately mislead him by giving him a bad piece of advice. So when you give the Nazir yayin, that's no worse than a bad piece of advice. I mean, again, he has his own access to yayin, but nevertheless, hey, buddy, smell this wine. This is the special grapes from the vineyards up in the Golan, and it's a vintage wine. Blah blah blah. Now, I want to point out something else. There's a major issue which starts with the Ran and it goes through the Achronim about the nature of Lifnei Iver. Does Lifnei Iver mean that when I facilitate your Avera, when I help you, Chas v'shalom, do an Avera, is it considered that I did the Avera? It's like as if I participated in that Avera. And we're going to see later on that the Gemara has a havamina that if you facilitate the Ovei and Avoda Zara, like he's forcing you at gunpoint to offer him the animals for sacrifice, which he doesn't have, let's say, is that Yeharig Vel Yav? What does that mean, Yeharig Vel Yav? Yeharig Vel Yav only applies to the big three. But the answer is, if I facilitate his Avoda Zara, it's as if I violated the Avoda Zara. Now, the one who analyzes this and writes pages and pages on this is the Panovich Rav, if you ever heard of him, Rav Kahaneman. My father knew him very well. He actually offered a job to my father down in Miami Beach. He used to come to Miami to raise funds for the Panovich Yeshiva. And I think I once told you about Rav Fuchs when he went on Aliyah from Chicago and he went to see the Panovich Rav who was then collecting funds in Chicago. Anyway, to make a long story short, the Panovich Rav says from this Gemara, you see that Lifnei Iver will apply even when you cannot apply that Aver to you. For example, you're not a Nazir, and yet you violate Lifnei Iver by offering Yayin to the Nazir. It cannot be that you're participating in his Aver because you're not a Nazir. You don't have that Aver. Anyway. So Gemara answers, betray Ibri Dinara. When does Rabbi Nosson say that you violate Lifnei Iver by giving wine to a Nazir? That's because the wine is on the other side of the river, and you're going to cross the river to make that wine accessible to the Nazir. Tekonami, and I'll read the language of the Brisa meticulously to prove this point. It says, lo yoshit, lo lo. It doesn't say don't give wine to a Nazir, but lo yoshit. Yoshit means to extend. Like, for example, in Melech Shabbos, you have amongst the various what they call avos of Hotzah. Hotzah is a multifaceted av. One of it is called moshit. You extend your hand. In Yiddish, it's called der Langen. And that's what it means. He was on the other side of the river, and he sort of extended it over the river, meaning it was very difficult, if at all possible, for the Nazir to get access because there weren't too many yachts at that time leaving, to Cyprus, whatever. Shmamin. Okay. Now we go on. Iboilu, another suffix, nasav and nasan mai. When we say that the Rabbanan established the Gzera that you're not allowed to do business transactions with the idol worshiper 3 days before his festival, what happens if you violated that Gzera de Rabbanan? So let's say, for example, you went ahead and you sold an animal to the Akum. He paid you money. What's the status of that money? Are you allowed to benefit from that money? Because in effect, when you benefit from that money, you're benefiting from the violation that you violated by selling him the animal within that 3-day period. And that's called in the Lashon HaShas Tfisas Damim. Like, for example, in Maseches Shvius, you're not allowed to sell the peros of Shvius that have Kedusha Shvius. What happens if you went and you violated that and you sold the peros of Shvius? What happens with the money? Are you allowed to benefit from the money? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Nosa v'Nosa Nosa, that there is a halach of Tfisas Damim to prohibit the benefits of the violation, and Reish Lakish Amar Nosa v'Nosa Mutter. There's no halach of Tfisas Dam. Eis Fei Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish. By the way, this is one of the rare occasions where we paskin like Reish Lakish against his Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan. Eideim shalovei kol chavim Nosa v'Nosan Asurim. I mean, it's pretty explicit. It says here, Nosan v'Nosan, you went ahead and you entered into a business transaction, then the evidence also. My love, lifnei idea. Now, this my love, lifnei idehem, sheds a whole new light on the machlokas between between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Now, we need a little bit of brisk over here, tzvei dinim, what we call, because we have to differentiate between the prohibition of transactions before the festival and the prohibition on the festival day itself. And when Reish Lakish says that Nosa v'Nosan mutter, that the Rabbanan didn't go so far as prohibiting the proceeds, the benefits, after you violated their edict, the Rabbanan. That was only a kula in the days before the festival. But as far as the day of the festival is concerned, even Reish Lakish agrees that that's an Isur Chamur. I don't know if it's Doraisa, I'm not going to say that, but there are different levels of the Rabbanans, and it generates Tfisas Damim. Lo, therefore the Gemara rejects the proof of Rabbi Yochanan to defend Reish Lakish and says, Eideim dafka. When does it say that Nosa v'Nosa Asurim? That's if he sold it on the very day of the festival. It's almost as if, the guy, the idol worshiper, wanted to bring an animal, a shepsela, to the Mizbeach to sacrifice for his idols, and he needed an animal. And on that very day, when he's about to celebrate his festival, you afforded him, you sold him an animal. There, even Reish Lakish agrees that's an Isur Chamur on a higher level of a D'Rabbanan Isur, and therefore there's Tfisas Damim and Nosa v'Nosan Os. Ika D'Amri, another possible version of the exchange back and forth between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish is Eisvei Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish was the one who read our Mishnah carefully and objected to Rabbi Yochanan. Eideim shel ovdei kacham nosan v'nosan asur. Look at the language here. It says Eideim asur is nosan v'nosan asur. That's because Eideim on the day of the festival itself. Eideim in, lifnei Eideim lo. If it would have been the 2 days before the festival, or according to one Mandi Omar, 3 days before the festival, then Einachinami, Nosan v'Nosan mutter. And Rabbi Yochanan rejects it, and he says the following: Tana idi v'idi, eidehem karile. When it's referring to either the days before the festival or the day of the festival itself, it's called eidehem in the language of the Tana, and therefore when it says Nasa v'nasan asur, it's referring to a dehem, meaning the entire period that's considered a dehem, even the 3 days before. Tanya Kavasi the Reish Lakish, we have a brisa to support Reish Lakish. Ksha Amru Asur Laseis v'Lasein Imahem. Lo Asru Ela B'Davar Miskayim Avodah Sheni Miskayim Lo. Okay, we'll get back to that in just a minute because that's not really the punchline for our purposes. V'Afilu B'Davar Miskayim Nosam v'Nosan Mutar. Those are the last 3 words are the key words that explicitly confirm Reish Lakish. What was the previous section that we ran through? When the Rabbanan prohibited, let's say, selling to a guy 3 days before, it did not include perishables. Like, for example, if you sell to a guy a vegetable 3 days before, by the time he gets to Yomi Dehem, the vegetable is already, they didn't have refrigeration like we have. It's already fashdunken. How do you say in English? It's already disintegrating, so to speak. So it's not going to lead to the celebration of that 3rd day or 4th day later, meaning of the festival. Okay, so that's called a davar she'eino miskayim. But it says explicitly nosam v'notan mutar. So we see that the Gemara is really supporting Reish Lakish. We don't even find a defense on behalf of Rabbi Yochanan. Tani Rav Zvid b'debei Rabbi Yoshaya davar she'eino miskayim mochrim lahem aval ein lokchim mehem. Okay, let's say the guy is not buying, but he's selling. And the benefit that he gets is from the fact that you're paying him money. In that case, the whole deal between Davar Miskayim, perishables, Eino Miskayim, all that is irrelevant. Why? Because his hana, his benefit, and his celebration to thank the deity is a result of the fact that he has your cash. Cash doesn't get ruined. Hahuminoi, there was a case of an Avoda Zara. This Shadar Le, did I skip anything? Just point out if I skip. Sometimes I turn too many pages. This Shadar Le Dinara case. Okay, this is a kind of a dinar that came from Caesarea. Le Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah. Now, when was this money sent as a gift to the Reish Galusa Rabbi Yehuda? This is not Rabbi Yehuda Nasi who authored the Mishnah. It was Biyom Edo. Now, the guy gets special pleasure from the fact that the Jew received and accepted his gift. And therefore, the Reish Galusa, by the name of Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah, is in a bind, and he turns to Reish Lakish. Havi Yosef Reish Lakish Gabi Omar. Hey, Chiyavad, what should I do? I'm in a no-win situation. How do you say it in proverbial English? You know, we used to say, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I don't know this. Anyway, it's a lose-lose situation. Why? Ashkeleh, if I accept it, he's going to be so excited about that, you know, that he sent a gift to the Reish Galus of the Jews, and the Jew accepted it. Is Azulu Mode, he's going to go to his deity on this day of celebration, and he's going to thank his deity. Lo Ashkeleh, if I say thanks but no thanks, I send him the Caesarian dinar back, then Havi Le Eva. This is going to create a tremendous stir against the Jews. Who knows how he's going to let it out against the Jews? Anti-Semitism is an old phenomenon. On Malay Reish Lakish, I'll tell you what you should do. Tol, accept it, so there won't be any Eva. But when he's not looking, Zroko Sola Bar Befana. Now, the word Befana means in his presence. Throw it into a bar so that, you know, you're not benefiting from him. Omar. So Rabbi Yehuda Nesiah doesn't understand Reish Lakish. He says, Kolshke de Havile Eva, if he sees me in front of his face, in his presence, throwing it into a bar, it's like taking my gift and throwing it away. Certainly it'll cause enmity. Kilacher Yadhu to make it look like you dropped it into the bar. So he should know that you're not benefiting from it because it's down in the bottom of the sea, you know. But on the other hand, he won't be insulted because you dropped it. It's backhanded. All right. Now the Mishnah says, Lash Elon v'lishal mehem. You're not allowed to lend a utensil free of charge to a guy in the 33-day period, and you're not allowed to borrow. Frek the Gemara Bishleim Lash Elon. I understand why you're not allowed to lend him. He's going to be very excited. He needed that utensil. He got it from a Jew. And to come avachle, this is a great benefit for him. He doesn't even have to pay for it, and he got the use of that avalishal mehem. But if you want to borrow from them, then they're losing as a result. Miyuta come and maitlahu. He had a beautiful vase, and now he gave it to the Jew. So why is he going to bless the deity? There can be machlokas here between Abai and Rava over and over and over again, and they're all, repetitious until it's coming out of our ears. Abai is always going to say it's gzeira, meaning if we allow you to borrow from them, which means they took a loss, you might mistakenly think you're allowed to lend them, which is clearly also because they'll be besimcha. Rava Amar Kula Mishum di Azulu Model, you know what? They're going to benefit from the fact that you borrowed their kli. Why? Because the guy wants to feel that the Jew needed him. And Kedafta to them, we say, you had to come on to them, and he wouldn't have had a blender unless he borrowed my blender. Another example, the same machlokas. The Mishnah says, Al vosam, v'luvos mehem. Bishleim al vosam. I understand why you don't lend money to the guy. The guy is thrilled by the fact that you lent him money. P.S. I don't understand this because he's going to pay ribbis for that. But in any event, mishum dekom arvachle. But lilvos mehem? You want to borrow money from him? Am I? He's not going to be thrilled when you're taking his money. The very fact that the Jew has to come on to the guy to borrow money from the guy, and the guy lends him money, the guy is feeling, wow, this is great. It's the Jews depend upon us. A third machlokas shina bai v'ro. Lefora and vilfra mihem. Right, you're not allowed to pay back their loans, which we understand. They'll be so thrilled to get the money back, because very often you extend a loan and you never see the money back. But then it says, you could take money from them. If, on the other hand, you're accepting their repayment of a loan, they're not going to be happy about that. And a person has an owl, a yoke on his shoulders to pay a loan. Rabbi, I don't know if you feel the same way I do. I know when I get an aliyah and I get a Misha Berach, like it's on my mind nonstop. Even if it's only twice chai, 36 shekel, no big deal. But until I pay the 36 shekel, it's like weighing heavily on my mind. So I get a special pleasure when I could pay back the loan. So even though the guy is now repaying a loan, he's losing money, but he still feels thrilled because he takes this yoke off his head. I remember my Rebbe, Rav Soloveitchik, Zichron Livracha, he's a true blue brisker, and he once asked, I think it was Yossi Adler was the Misharis at that time, and he asked him to buy him a cup of coffee. So across the street from First Hall, where we had the shir, there was a, like a Makola card thing where you could buy coffee. So he brings back a coffee to the Rav, after the Rav had given him a quarter, 25 cents a quarter. Today it's probably $1.50 or $2.50, I don't know what it is. And the Rav says to him, Yossi, how much was it? So instead of saying 25 cents, which would have been a lie, he says to him, don't worry about it, Rebbe. That wasn't the right answer. So Rav Salvation says to him, what do you mean don't worry about it? How much was the coffee? So Yossi says it was 30 cents. The next day, Rav Salvation comes running into Shir, holding a nickel. Where is Yossi Adler? I want to pay him back the 5 cents. So that's what I'm saying. There's a certain sense of, you want to pay back your loans. Utsrichi. Now, the Mishnah over and over again tells us in two directions that you're not allowed to have these transactions with loans and paying back and so forth and so on. The first one is business transactions, which means, that you're selling and buying. Okay, I understand. Mishum de kamarvach lahu v'yasa l'moda. V'lishol mehem de me'uti kamait lahu. Right, if you're borrowing something from the guy, he's losing the use of the object. Why would he be happy? And that's why I need the Mishnah to tell me the case of she'ela, of borrowing, that you're not allowed to even borrow something from the guy. V'itan lishol mehem, even if we had the case of prohibiting borrowing from him, I would still come to the wrong conclusion. That the very fact that the Jew is borrowing something is something significant. And that's going to bring the pagan to express his gratitude to his deity. But in the case where you're going to borrow money from the idol worshiper, and therefore he's minus, he loses money, and he doesn't even know if he'll ever get repaid. Zara bialmes, I would say it's allowed, it's permissible, because all he's going to do is be distressed. Omar, tuv lo hadri zuze, maybe the mother will never get back to him. Kamashmon, therefore the Mishnah wants to tell me that even in this case, he's very happy that the Jew has to come on to him for a loan. V'itan eluvos mehem mishum de ka'amar bal korche mifrei. In other words, I'll get my money back. Jews are not going to play games with goyim, with mafia. He'll pay me back. But now I'm very thrilled that he had to borrow money from me. But if you're coming to the idol worshiper to collect his money because he owes you a debt, desulo hadre zuze, right? The money will never go back to the idol worshiper. And therefore the Mishnah has to tell me tzricha that chiddush as well. Then we finish up with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Nifroi Mehem. Rabbi Yehuda says that although you're not allowed to pay back the guy a loan that's outstanding, but Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to collect a loan. Frekti Gemara, we have a principle here of the Chachamim that even though at this particular moment in time it's really a loss, right? Because the guy is paying back, he's forking over the money, but nevertheless, liachar zman, in the long range, he's happy about it because he has this debt removed from his shoulders. Does Rabbi Yehuda reject that principle? Basadya, we're going to prove from a brisa. Now, this brisa deals with Chol HaMoed. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Isha lo tasud b'moed, mipnei shenivel hu lo. Umod Rabbi Yehuda b'sid sheyachol lekaplo b'moed, shetofalto b'moed afal pishim mitzayra achshav simcha hi liachar zman. Here, Rabbi Yehuda seems to embrace that view that even if it's immediately a tsar in the short run, it's simcha in the long run. So what are these cases? Okay. Now, what we have to know about the physics here of this discussion is there's something called a depilatory, right? A depilatory means to remove hairs, right? And bodily hairs that a woman wants to remove. And there's something called Sid, right? I had a good friend named Sid. But anyway, Sid here is the Hebrew word for lime, L-I-M-E. Now, the chemistry of lime is that, number one, it removes hair from the skin, unwanted hair, but at the same time, it gives a rosy kind of complexion to the skin. So now, Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo tasid b'moed. She's not allowed to apply lime to her skin during Chol HaMoed. And why is that? Because it stirs her simchas hamoed, meaning when the Torah says v'samachta b'chagecha, it includes all 7 days, including what? Including Chol HaMoed. And the immediate result of putting lime on her face is that it causes her distress. Now, ultimately, it'll improve her appearance, but right now, during the festival period, the Yontif period, it's going to be just distress. However, Rabbi Yehuda agrees in a case of Sid sheyechola lekaplo b'moed. There's another kind of lime that if you apply it to the face, you're able to peel it off during Chol HaMoed, and that even though at the moment that you apply it, it's distressful, but nevertheless, smecha hi liachar zman. In other words, when she peels it off, she'll be happy. And therefore, even though right now, immediately she's in a state of distress, but she'll be happy during Chol HaMoed when she peels it off. So, Frek the Gemara, we see that Rabbi Yehuda accepts the opinion of the Chacham, Afal Pisha Mitzayir Ma'achshav is Simchi Liachar Zman. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Hanach Lehilchas Moed. Don't bring me any proofs and analogies from the laws of Chol HaMoed. Why? Dekulo Meitzar Achshav Simcha Liachar Zman. Basically, everything that we do at Chol HaMoed is a little bit distressful. It's a hassle when we do it now, but we're going to enjoy it down the line, and therefore we're allowed to do it on Chol HaMoed. Ravina gives a different slug up, and he says, Ove kochav linyan piron li olam meitzar. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that although the guy gets the noose around his neck loosened by paying back his debt, but he doesn't care about that. He's really in distress when he has to shell out the 1,000 shekel to pay back the loan. Now the Gemara goes on to show a machlokus between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda regarding the whole issue of collecting a debt, a repayment of debt from a guy prior to the Yomi Dehem, which Rabbi Yehuda allows. Masnisin de lo Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. Our mission is against Rabbi Yehuda. Sanya Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Omer milva b'shtar ein nifra mehem milva balpeh nifra mehem mipnei shu kematzel miyadam. In other words, are you allowed to collect a loan from the guy within the 3-day period before his holiday? So Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha makes the following distinction. If it's a milv b'shtar, then don't collect the loan, because that collection of the loan is guaranteed in any event because you have a shtar. But a milv balpeh nifra mehem mipnei shu kematzel miyadam. When you collect a milva balpeh, which has no shtar, then basically it's considered as if you rescued the money from their hands, which means that Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha differentiates between two cases. In some cases, the Oved Avoda Zara is going to rejoice by paying up a debt. And in some cases, he'll be in a permanent state of distress. If you have a shtar on this loan, then the Oved Avoda Zara realizes that the Jew is going to inevitably collect that money. And therefore, if, let's say, the Jew goes ahead with that shtar and he collects that chov, basically, since he knows the guy that he's going to ultimately pay him, he feels good about the fact that he has the noose loosened around his neck, and he's relieved. And therefore, again, he'll thank his idol. However, in the case of a milval peh, the Oved Avoda Zara has the ability to say Lo Hayu Dvar Miolam. He will be believed in a court to deny the loan because there's no documentation of the loan. Therefore, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha allows you to collect that loan that's a verbal loan and not written in a document because the guy is only going to be in distress. And why is he in distress? Because he was hoping that he wouldn't have to pay back the loan. There's no shtar to prove. Yosef Rav Yosef Achored Rav Ab Yosef Rav Abba Kamid Rav Huna Yosef Vikomer Hilchasok Rav Yeshua ben Levi. We paskin like Rav Yeshua ben Levi. I'm sorry, Rav Yeshua ben Karcha, my mistake. And therefore we differentiate between collecting a loan which is documented and collecting a loan which is not documented. V'hilchasa ki Rabbi Yehuda. So let's see what this means. Hilchasa ki Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha ha'amara. That we've already explained. And we differentiate between a milvat shtar and milvat peh. But what does it mean that we paskin ki Rabbi Yehuda? Disnan. Okay, now here we're entering into a gigantic sugya. And although, as you and I know, I like to finish the daf, I think in this case, time is up. And we should end here. Again, we're pretty much at the end of the Amud. We're 4 lines up before the end of the Amud. Actually, we're only 1 line before the end of the Amud. And I'm just going to give a little 2-minute introduction to what we have to do tomorrow. There's going to be a machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Yosef. Let's just get the names. And Rav Huna, excuse me, has to tell me how do we paskin in this case. And we're going to paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. Again, the case itself is very complicated. You hired somebody a dyer, a professional dyer, to dye wool, and he dyed it the wrong color. And the question is, how much does he have to pay? And so forth and so on. There's going to be machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim. And Rav Yosef is going to justify Rav Huna's statement of Hilchasok Rav Yeshua ben Karcha because, that's the case of Yochid v'Rabim, and instead of passing like the Rabim, which is the Tanakam against Rabbi Yehu, against Rabbi Yeshua, that doesn't differentiate between milvat shtar and milvat peh. We're going to paskin like the Yochid against the Rabim, like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. And that's why I need Rav Huna's statement that we paskin like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. But in the case of Hanosein Tzemer Litzaba, where Rav Huna went out of his way to say we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, Rav Yosef is going to claim that is completely unnecessary. Why? Because we have a principle called machlokes v'achkach stam hilchsa stam. So there's going to be a stam mishnah which reflects the shita of Yehuda in the case of Nosein Tzemer and Rabbi Yehuda paskin. It depends which is greater, the shvach or the Yitzia. And therefore, Rav Yosef objects to the fact that Rav Huna had to go out of his way to tell me that we paskin like Rav Yehuda. I don't need Rav Yosef. I don't need Rav Huna to tell me that because of the universal principle that machlokas v'yachach stam halochik stam mishnah. All right, so that's just a little bit of an introduction to Belina, to what we want to cover tomorrow.